Welcome back to the channel, boys. So today I wanted to discuss whether these superhero games in general are suffering from the attempt to make them realistic. Now, off the bat, I'll give my opinion. I actually like realism to an extent when it comes to superhero games. Really, most games in general, right? I think a lot of us do, but especially with superhero games. Like I've said before, I actually prefer a more cinematic single-player gaming experience. I think that's hard to achieve if not paired with realistic-looking graphics. And by realism, I'm not referring to perfect real-world physics or logic. When you're talking about the superhero genre, you automatically have to have some sort of suspension of disbelief because obviously none of this is possible most of the time, whatever we're dealing with, whatever we see in the game. I think a perfect example of this is Batman Arkham Knight, and you could make an argument for any of the Arkham games at their time of release, but especially Arkham Knight because of how well it holds up today. I think holds up is an understatement. It genuinely looks and feels better than probably all superhero games since its release besides the Insomniac Spider-Man games. And I think you'd be in the right to argue that it's actually still even better than those Spider-Man games. What brings my attention to this in the first place would be the Wolverine game from Insomniac and the gameplay footage we got to see a few weeks ago and some of the discussions I've seen about it since. Now, I did already make a video discussing the gameplay as a whole, and when talking about the graphics, I brought up the backlash it was getting from some people saying the graphics looked like dog shit or the suit looked like plastic, and even recently I've seen comparisons between this game and Gears of War. You know, you compare the environments, and honestly, I hate to say it, but when I saw the comparison, it did make me think like, damn, are the graphics actually garbage? In the video, I said it's just what I expect and that I'm not sure our current gen can make them look any better. I don't think the current consoles can look any better than that. Before I walk that back, we do have to realize the game is still a few months out from release. So I don't like to make judgments on pre-alpha footage because I don't think it's fair. But truly, how much better could they really get? I mean, I don't know if it's the lighting, the camera angle, or what about it that does kind of seem underwhelming, because I think a game like Arkham Knight does benefit from taking place at nighttime. I think it's easier to hide weaker graphics, and without getting too deep, I think we can all understand you can hide a lot of imperfections when it's dark. That's not to say that even interior levels of the game were dark as well, but I assume we're knowledgeable enough to understand it's much easier to make an interior level, like a set design, a lot more detailed, and I'm sure even in the Wolverine games, any interior level designs will look a lot better than what we saw in the footage that took place. It's, I think, entirely outdoors. I only saw complaints about the first part of the footage where Wolverine is fighting with Jean Grey, but when we get to the part where he like takes off on the bike and the whole part of that level where he's fighting on the beds of trucks and on top of those trucks, I think the graphics look pretty good there. But the same way Arkham Knight has the darkness to hide imperfections, this specific part of the level is moving through what looks like a mountain range or some sort of forest, a decent amount of fog, and pretty much what I would assume is some sort of loop of the landscape in the background as the trucks drive through it. So it's harder to nitpick and to even notice any of the imperfections we see in the beginning of the footage. And just as a disclaimer, you know, obviously I'm not a graphics expert, and as I said before, the game isn't even finished yet, so we're not making any final judgments on the game's quality. I actually think it'll be a good game when it comes out. So we've talked about the attempt to make these games realistic. How about the inverse? You know, what about a game like the Marvel Tokon, or to be honest, I'm gonna just call it the Marvel Tokon fighting game. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. A lot of you are probably gonna hate me for it, but let's take a game like that, or Marvel Rivals, where they are extremely stylized and super exaggerated versions of these characters. Now, I'd want to compare the Tokon fighting game with Injustice 2, but first, let's talk about Marvel Rivals. I think this is the best example of the inverse when discussing realistic superhero games and a stylized game. What I love about this game is that everyone is a souped up version of their comic character. I mean, you look at the Punisher in that game and he has absolutely no business being that swole, but it looks great. You know, it looks badass, and all the women look fine as hell. And you know what? I think that's great in video games. We're just exaggerating the features that we love about both sexes, right? I mean, the men are hyper masculine badasses and the women are extremely good looking but deadly badasses. And to be honest, when the game was revealed, I was kind of put off by this art style because, again, I tend to lean into more realistic looking games. And when you look at the early version of Marvel Rivals, this is also what the studio was going for very early on. But obviously they decided to go all in on the comic stylized aspect. And even though it wasn't my first choice, I am endlessly satisfied and just impressed by that decision. Because when you do it like this and just go all out and you don't have that blocker of, could he actually do this? Are we going too far? Does this look fake? Because off the bat, you're going in knowing this is going to look fake and it's almost going to look like a cartoon. So they can really do whatever they want. Now, I'm not saying they can now make Wolverine fly, you know, just because of an art style choice. But even down to like the animations, they can be free in making it as dramatic, colorful. They can make it over the top, as over the top as they want. When you have realistic looking graphics and just a more grounded world around, the character, you have to operate in something that at least kind of rhymes with the real world. You kind of have the same constraints as the live action movies. Now, to cut Wolverine some slack, the game, Marvel Rivals is a multiplayer hero shooter, and Wolverine is a single player cinematic kind of game. Those are completely different goals, The Rivals doesn't need to feel grounded because the game, it's already so chaotic and it's moving so fast already. Wolverine, it needs that weight to make you feel the story. I feel like with the graphics being better or at least leaning towards more realistic, it just gives it that weight. I don't know, maybe it helps us connect with the character more. Could this be achieved in a different art style? I mean, of course it can. I just don't think it can reach the same level, quite honestly. Now on to Tokon versus Injustice. Here we have two of the same type of game, okay? A fighting game. The Marvel one being the example of a highly stylized, exaggerated comic book looking art style, and Injustice 2 being a more realistic, still actually kind of stylized within its own means, but graphically leaning more on realism. Even in this case, I gotta go with Injustice 2, just as a preference, that I have. And actually another game that still holds up graphically in my opinion. I think if you drop this game today on current gen, it would not be that bad. There isn't much more to be said as far as the differences between the two. I think our comparisons between Rivals and Wolverine can be said about these as well. But if the question is which one is better for the future of superhero games, I gotta go with the Injustice 2 realistic graphics. I think the Tokon style is very niche, and I can't see it being as big of a game or product as something like Injustice or Mortal Kombat strictly because of the art style. I think the more realistic graphics appeal to a broader audience, and that the more stylized graphics don't really carry that same weight like we kind of talked about before. So what would be the conclusion here, Well, both styles can absolutely coexist, and they can both be done very well. The issue isn't the realism itself, it's really just the execution, because something like Arkham Knight proves that realism works when a studio fully commits to it. Marvel Rivals proves that stylized works when a studio goes all in and they commit to it. So where does that leave a game like Wolverine? Well, actually, I think Insomniac, the studio that makes Wolverine, I think they found a pretty good middle ground with their Spider-Man games. The graphics lean more realistic, which I like, but a lot of the action, the villains, and animations are over the top. The funny thing is right now there's a lot of talk about how Insomniac should not be trusted with Marvel games anymore. And, I do understand that argument in certain respects, and you can hate the Wolverine graphics and think they're dog shit, but we haven't seen another studio step up to the plate and give us something better yet. At least not in the last 10 years, and especially not for Marvel games. Let me know your preference, man. I know I talked about how I like realism, and I kind of touched as to why that is. Let me know why you might like stylized, man, or if you agree with me and you like realistic. I mean, which one do you think is actually going to be better for the future of these games? Either way, man, thank you for watching the video. I've been posting a lot lately, bro, just trying to get back into it, and I appreciate all the support, man. A couple of my videos have been going pretty stupid, man, so I really appreciate that support. Really appreciate everyone commenting, and I think we got like 100 subscribers in the last 28 days, it says. So man, if any of you are watching this right now, bro, thank you so much, man. Have a good day. Peace.